Can you guys hear me okay? I just want to say how awesome it is to be with you this morning. I don't get to hang out with church people very often. My work schedule is a little crazy, and this is like being with what I call my people. The guys at work laugh because I talk about my people, the faith people, the people that might take a lap. You never know what's going to happen. So I just want to say thank you. Let me encourage you, if you have not signed up to go see the documentary, everyone has, if you work out, you go to the gym, you have your playlist, right, that gets you amped up, ready to work out. Man, I'm sitting in my chair just going, let's go. Let's go. It's time. Greenville is being marked, and I want you to be part of it, and that's why I'm here. I also want to bring attention to the prayer for our kids. I know you don't know this, but the school resource officer program in the city falls into my purview. And our kids need you. They need prayer. The enemy is after them. I'll mention it here in a minute, but 12 to 14 years of age is the target. You guys, they're seeing stuff and they're being exposed to things that they're just not mentally ready and able to process. And so please pray for those in the Greenville County school system. Pray for their families, but pray that the Lord is walking the hallway of each and every school. They are the future, and they are worth a little bit of your time to just bring them before the throne and say, God, just be with our babies. Okay, enough of that. Okay. It's truly an honor to be included in the Great Commission series and invited to speak to you today. But full transparency, when Zana first asked me if I would come and speak, there was definitely some hesitation because I've never addressed a congregation, and it's a tad intimidating. But you guys seem like nice people, so. However, I'm reminded that this is not about me, but about a message I believe that I carry for the local church as it relates to trafficking in our city. Let me start off by saying, while yes, I am a captain here in Greenville, the content that I'm going to share, my opinions and my comments do not necessarily represent or reflect the city or my department. Just now that we got that out of the way. Yes, my hand. Okay, there we go. Let me give you some background on me, story time. I began my law enforcement career in 2005 and spent the majority of my time on patrol assigned to the east side of Greenville. This included Wade Hampton, East North, Pleasantburg, and the Haywood Pelham Road area. While none of the well-known strip clubs here in Greenville were in my jurisdiction, I had all the surrounding hotels. And just for reference, there are no strip clubs within the city's jurisdiction, as they're all zoned for the county. Fun fact. The hotels were where I would encounter women who were in a life that I knew nothing about. I would respond to drug overdoses, suicide attempts, and domestic assaults in this area for years. And while many red flags presented themselves in addition to what the call information was, I didn't think more of it than these women were simply involved in prostitution, a lifestyle of their own choosing. When the circumstances met the statute of prostitution or loitering to engage in drug activity, the arrest was made, the woman dropped off at the detention center, and then off I'd go to answer another call for service. This was the norm. However, there was one call that would change the trajectory of my life forever. While on patrol one really hot summer day, I drove up on a disabled vehicle in the area of Verde Boulevard. It was a young woman and her son who were traveling from Florida when their vehicle left them stranded. So I put them both in the back of my patrol vehicle and into the air conditioning while we waited for a tow truck. Since it can be kind of uncomfortable to sit in the back of a police car, I tried to keep them occupied with small talk. I asked her what brought her to Greenville all the way from Florida, and she told me she was a dancer. Naively, I asked her, was it tap? Was it ballet? Hip hop? Maybe a little jazz? You guys, I was sheltered, okay? She said no, that she was actually an exotic dancer and was here to dance at Platinum Plus just up the street. She went on to educate me about the circuit she was working. She explained to me that it's a business of sorts. Her promoter would book her at different clubs. She would pay a fee to the club. She would pay the DJ. She would pay the bartender. And then she would pay her promoter, otherwise known as her boyfriend. She didn't get into too much more detail, obviously, but kept it very matter of fact. But something in the way that she was talking about it just disturbed my spirit. This wasn't normal. And after I saw them off with the tow truck, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Fast forward to a Sunday morning several years later, I was watching TV and I saw a commercial for an organization called A21. This was an organization that sought to educate the public about sex trafficking and bring women out of the life. The stories they were telling sounded a lot like some calls for service I had been on, and I thought about the lady with the broken down car. Could it have been sex trafficking? This set me on a path to research organizations within the upstate involved in the anti-trafficking movement. This was when I found the local nonprofit Switch, and I immediately signed up for the next volunteer training. It was then, in 2017, 12 years after I started my career in law enforcement, that I now had the vocabulary to explain all of the things I had seen over the years on patrol. This was the catalyst that set me on a path to advocate for more training on trafficking and sexual exploitation for law enforcement. Through the trainings I attended, I started to realize that the majority of the women who had been trafficked and exploited had a common thread in their story. A cop was part of their trauma. You see, we had been trained to make the arrest and call it a day. We didn't know. We had never received trauma-informed training. At the time, such a thing did not exist. We didn't realize that these women were being exploited by someone else and that there were specific questions that needed to be asked. One of my greatest gifts is a friendship I started with a woman a few years ago that reached out to me on Facebook, who was herself a survivor. Her story is not unlike so many others, where she was sold to others for sex by a family member. But it was through hearing her story that I realized just how much trauma law enforcement had caused in her journey. She mustered up enough courage to ask me if I would be willing to help her overcome her fear of law enforcement. I was upfront with her and I told her I had no specialized training on trauma and how to help her, but I would do whatever I could to help. After she cleared it with her therapist, it started with monthly meetups for coffee, where I would just sit with her while I was in uniform. It took her quite a while to be comfortable with me just sitting in my presence. Then she asked to come sit in my office, a building where a lot of cops would be walking around. This was a process. And while we were doing it to help her overcome her own fear, what she didn't realize is how this was opening my own eyes to how much damage had been done and how much work we in law enforcement have yet to do to reestablish trust. As she would share many of her life stories with me, I would find myself retroactively going back through many of the calls for service in my head, now connecting the dots. These women were being exploited, a product of trauma and unimaginable pain. Those with the least number of choices that we as officers, and quite frankly the justice system as a whole, had labeled criminals. During this time, I started making it a point to eat lunch at Jasmine Kitchen as much as I could. For those unfamiliar, Jasmine Kitchen is the social enterprise lunch cafe of Jasmine Road, which is a local 2-year residential program for women who are survivors. It not only gave me an opportunity to financially support this incredible restaurant with a mission I loved more than anything, but the women who worked there got to see a non-threatening police officer who was just there to grab lunch, offer a smile and a kind word. But one day, while I was meeting a friend for lunch, one of the ladies who worked there approached me. I was in uniform per usual, and I could tell that it took a lot of courage for her to come up and ask if she could tell me something. Little did I know that what she was about to say would wreck me completely. She said that she was in recovery and had been in a few run-ins with law enforcement over the years, and while she couldn't find the exact officers she had dealt with, she wanted to come and apologize to me for the way she had treated those cops. I was literally stunned. I knew that this took an enormous amount of courage to come and say this. I immediately had tears in my eyes. I told her how much I appreciated her coming over, and I told her thank you for what she had said. But then I told her that we as a whole had a lot of work to do to help women who have been exploited and marginalized. I told her that I was sorry for where we had missed the mark and dropped the ball. I stood up and gave her the biggest hug, and it was a moment I will never forget. Another confirmation that the work we are doing is so important. According to the 2024 South Carolina Attorney General's annual report, Greenville County is #1 in the state for trafficking. Familial trafficking still being the most common way victims are being exploited. I'm sure by now you've got an image in your head of what a trafficking survivor looks like. Well, without even asking, I can tell you it's wrong. The target age is 12 to 14, and from personal experience, I know for a fact we have teenagers right now in the juvenile justice system who are being trafficked. A case we just worked was of a 14-year-old who was a chronic runaway, and when officers located her a few weeks ago, she was high and with 2 adult men who were not her family members. It's indeed happening in our city. There's another organization involved in this space of trafficking called Shared Hope International. And every year, they give all 50 states a grade, like a report card. This grade encompasses grading of legislative framework, trauma-informed protections for survivors, and education and training for law enforcement. Guess what grade South Carolina got? We got a D overall with, get this, an F in prevention and training. An F, the worst. You can't get any worse than that, right? So when you consider the expectations of the citizens have of their law enforcement officers are getting the best training on the fastest growing criminal enterprise of our time, I can assure you they are not. In February of 2023, I was sitting in my office catching up on the news and came across an announcement that the movie Sound of Freedom would be released on July 4th of that year. And attached to this announcement was a video of the movie trailer. This is a movie I had been waiting to see since 2020, but it had been delayed due to COVID and a myriad of other challenges. I was excited to finally see a movie based on actual events about a real-life law enforcement officer who had dedicated his life to making a difference. So I played it. Tears came almost immediately. I jumped up and shut my office door because I'm not about to let anyone see me ugly cry in my office over a movie trailer. I work with a bunch of dudes. It's not happening. As I continued to watch, I was overcome with a righteous anger, grief, and hope, all simultaneously. After the trailer ended, I had a moment, and if I'm being completely honest, I wanted to flip my desk over. This was real. This is happening all over the world, and it was happening in my community, and yet it wasn't talked about enough. So, in my moment of being caught up with what I had just watched, I immediately got on the phone with Operation Underground Railroad. This is the organization started by the Homeland Security officer depicted in the movie. I told them who I was and that I respectfully wasn't getting off the phone with them until they could help me bring trafficking training to my department. The lady was so kind and promised me that she would have their law enforcement liaison call me right back. A few moments later, a gentleman called me and told me that he had just heard that a very passionate police captain from Greenville, South Carolina, was desperate to bring training to her city and that he'd better give me a call back. I got a good laugh out of that, and so did he, but I told him that I was entirely serious. He told me that he found it interesting that I called because they had had a difficult time bringing training to South Carolina. Every agency that had been approached had told them no. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I said, "Sir, I don't believe in coincidences, and I'm telling you that I have the biggest yes and an even bigger door for y'all to come in and train our police officers." He was elated and said that he would put me in touch with the man who did all of their domestic law enforcement training. To make a very long story short, the lead instructor called me a few days later and said he had been trying to get into South Carolina for years and had always been met with resistance. But now we were going to make it happen. He then told me the cost of said 2-day training was $10,000. Y'all almost passed out. Never in my life. We're cops. We don't have that kind of budget. But I was already thinking in my mind, okay, God, I need you to provide. Well, then he told me the Operation Underground Railroad was so moved, I feel like they felt like they were threatened, by my resolve to get training to my officers that they were gifting me $5,000 to go towards the cost of the training. So all I had to do was raise the rest of it. Fast forward a few months, and Defenders for Children heard about what I was trying to do, and they stepped up to cover the other $5,000. It was the most incredible training event. I had friends and community partners donate breakfast and lunch so the officers attending the training didn't have to worry about lunch breaks, leaving the facility and coming back on time. They could sit with the heavy information they were getting and network with officers from neighboring agencies to share investigations and resources. It was incredible. There were over 150 officers who attended that training, all from South Carolina agencies. Truly, to see God move and make it happen for us was the most incredible part. In 2024, I was asked to step into a co-chair position of the Upstate Regional Human Trafficking Task Force led by the State Attorney General's office to assist in facilitating dialogue, building community partnerships, tapping into innovative ideas on how we as a region can essentially formulate a full-scale attack on the fastest growing criminal enterprise of our time. In 2023, Greenville and Horry counties were tied for the #1 spot for trafficking. I was hopeful that in 2024, based on training, awareness, and overall community engagement, we might see Greenville's high rankings for the most cases drop. Sadly, we just dominated the top spot all by ourselves this time. Greenville, known for being, that Greenville. We're on every top 10 list in the country for retirement, places to vacation, the coolest parks, the nicest bridges. We're now top in the state for trafficking. Now that's probably very difficult for some of you to hear. Some of you, like me, may have grown up in Greenville and cannot fathom this reality. This is, after all, modern day slavery. If that phrase or term makes you uncomfortable, good. I want you to be uncomfortable. People are more inclined to take action when they're uncomfortable. It's the fastest growing criminal enterprise of our time. The reason is basic economics. Supply and demand, right? There's an insatiable desire for sex, and traffickers are skilled at making sure the supply is there. Why is trafficking so lucrative, you might ask? You can sell a drug one time. You can sell a gun one time. But a human being, you can make money selling over and over, multiple times a day. This is slavery. And we get to choose if we engage or will we look away. When I go out to the community to bring awareness to trafficking and exploitation, I say, you cannot fight an enemy you have yet to identify. The enemy is literally trafficking in the community and church's ignorance and apathy. So where has the American church been all this time while this is going on? Well, let me tell you. If you look at the data, the number one buyers of sex here in the US and globally are white American men, most who have families of their own. Where does this start, you might ask? Surely people don't just start buying women and children for sex. They don't. Pornography is the gateway. According to a recent report, 54% of practicing Christians report consuming pornography regularly. 47% of families in the US reported that pornography is a problem in their home. 11 years old is the average age that the child is first exposed to it. 94% of children will see pornography by the age of 14. 87, Zaina knows this is one of my favorite things. 87% of Christian women surveyed said they viewed pornography. When the books and then the movies 50 Shades of Grey came out, self-identifying Christian women flocked to the movie theaters to support a movie depicting some of the most violent sexual content released to the general public in movie theaters. Think about that. What's even more disturbing is that I remember being in a trafficking training and overhearing a conversation of women who were talking about a church picnic where the books were being passed around and discussed among the ladies of the church. I've even had spirited debates with women online who would identify as Christians as to why there's nothing wrong with viewing porn and reading such books. God help us. Why do I bring this up? Not to beat the church up, but to lend perspective. One of my favorite online sites, Fight the New Drug, states that research shows people who consume porn frequently are more likely to objectify and dehumanize others. So let's go back to talking about police officers for a minute. Pay attention, this is very important. Research shows that consumption of pornography, even one time, begins to rewire the brain. I read a study years ago on men who consume pornography regularly, and when researchers tested the part of the brain that lights up when they looked at a woman, it was also the part of the brain that lit up while looking at an inanimate object like a tool in the garage. Now, consider this when thinking of police officers who respond to scenes of sexual assault, trafficking, or any scenario in which a woman has been victimized. It's not that they are intentionally being cold or callous. It's that if they're consuming porn on a regular basis, they're rendered incapable of seeing women as anything more than an object. Law enforcement is a predominantly male profession. Think about the church. If the church leadership and the congregation are participating in that culture of porn, do you think trafficking and sexual exploitation is on their list of priorities? Probably not. I believe that it's God's heart to see an end to this evil on every front. And you can see how multifaceted this issue is. It's the wellness of officers, it's the training, and it's the community resources. While yes, we are continuing to recruit community partners and build up a list of robust resources for victims, we're still missing what I believe is the most integral piece of this puzzle, the church. While organizations like Switch are sending awareness volunteers like myself all over the upstate to educate and equip people with the information they need to shine a light on trafficking and exploitation, there's only so much that they can do. While residential programs like Jasmine Road exist, the wait list for survivors in immediate need can be discouraging. The state and other government entities are struggling to keep up with the number of cases pouring in and are immediately handicapped due to budgetary constraints. It's time for the church to enter the chat. I was once asked during an interview what it is that keeps me up at night. And I can tell you emphatically, it's not seeing these victims. It's walking around them, not noticing them, not hearing them when they are silently calling out for help. The lack of resources, the lack of law enforcement training, the absence of justice, and most importantly, the apathetic way in which we have responded to these survivors is what bothers me infinitely. What does the Great Commission look like in my life, the life of a police officer? There's 3 specific scriptures I've based my entire career on that I believe ties in beautifully to the Great Commission, and they are Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here am I, send me." Micah 6:8, which reads in part, "Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." And my favorite, Esther 4:14. "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." I remember being a rookie officer 20 years ago, dealing with domestic abuse cases and standing at a residence where I had a victim, and it was always a stone's throw away from a church who had its doors closed and offered no services, because here in Greenville, we literally have a church on every corner. I'm not going to stand up here and posture in a way to tell you what I think you should do as a church community as it relates to this specific issue, but what I will stand up here and say to you is, our community is hurting. We have an undercurrent of unresolved trauma, generational rebellion, and principalities of darkness running rampant in our streets, unchecked and unchallenged. The church has taken a defensive position, and from where I sit in this fight, that's a losing strategy. I was assigned to our beautiful and beloved downtown area for many years, and I've seen firsthand the demonic influence manifest not only in the calls for service due to sexual assault, violence, gang activity, and yes, trafficking, but also in the empty, hollow shells of human beings just walking the streets with no hope. Suicides, overdoses, etc. And I remember just wishing we had more churches doing outreach or prayer walks downtown. People who truly love Jesus, engaging the culture and taking authority over darkness and inviting God into those spaces. But I never saw it. Sure, there were the regular street preachers, but they never loved on people and showed Jesus to anyone. We need you out here. I need you out here. My prayer in coming here today, sorry, I lost my spot. I knew it was going to happen. The devil is a liar. My prayer in coming here today is that you now have gotten a glimpse into a world that you may not fully have been awake to, that you're not overwhelmed in a negative way by what you've heard, but inspired to get involved. I'm personally grateful for the church laborers who are involved and are choosing to say, "Here am I, Lord, send me." The more we take the Great Commission and walk it out in our daily lives in a practical way, the more I believe we will see the shifting of the culture. And just maybe we will see Greenville #1 only for the things we love Greenville for. Thank you for your time.